in a moment. But first up, I want to cross back to Melbourne again to join Michael Danby, the Shadow Parliamentary Secretary to the Opposition Leader. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
Pleasure.
Look, I want to go to key areas of foreign policy and what's happening in Syria in a moment. But first up, Opposition Leader Bill Shorten's off for the next week. It's a strange time to take a week off when you've got a new Prime Minister only 2 weeks into the job struggling to find his feet.
Look, Bill's a normal person. He's got 3 kids at school holidays. The grandparents are in Queensland. In order to, be able to work in an intense parliamentary period, people have got to be human beings. His best defence is normality, and that's the truth.
Yeah, I suppose there is never a good time to take a week off as opposition leader, so good on him. But you must be concerned, I know, of course, as a Labor MP, you've been leading in the polls for so long. Tony Abbott's been so unpopular. You see this convulsion on the government side, and of course Malcolm Turnbull's extremely popular. Straight away a lift in the polls, and things are looking a lot tougher for Bill Shorten and of course for the whole party.
Well, Bill was very generous. He said he thought it was better for Australia that Malcolm Turnbull took over in his hour-long interview and Q&A. And I know you're a big fan of the ABC like I am, Chris, but he did very well on that. I think having a longer time, again, allowed people to see sort of the light and shade of his character. So, look, I was actually surprised as a sort of pretty hard-bitten politician that the Libs only bounced to 50-50, two-party preferred. Let's see how it goes out in the next few months. But
what do you mean? Let's see how it goes. Let's see how it goes, and you might have to change leaders yourself.
No. We're not the British Labor Party. We've got a system thanks to
the Australian
the
Labor Party hasn't got too bad a record on this.
The last legacy of the dear leader Rudd is that we've got a system, though, that virtually ensures that there's no change.
Don't sound so happy about it.
No, it's actually very good because Bill has got the capability and now he's got the stability. One of the things you should really, all of us, give us credit for is the fact that we've been very united. It could have been a very backbiting opposition with each other after the removal of the 2 Prime Ministers, but it's been a pretty united show, and we've actually been too successful in driving Tony Abbott out of office.
It's a fair argument to make. It is a fair argument to make. Let's now move on to foreign policy, a crucial issue that you've got a particular interest in, and that, of course, is what Australia is doing about the Syria regime. Now, we heard from the United Nations, from the United States, and at the UN General Assembly meeting where Julie Bishop, the Deputy Liberal Leader and Foreign Minister, is spending the next little while, that Australia is adjusting its stance, that we are now saying that we don't say that Bashar al-Assad, as president of Syria, has to stand aside before there's any reckoning or resolution of the Syrian internal civil dispute. That basically we're happy to fight alongside him in order to defeat Islamic State. You're saying that's the wrong call?
Absolutely, and you're essentially right. Julie Bishop's apparently signed up in New York to an Iranian-Russian peace over that area of the Middle East, from Lebanon to Iran. This is a disastrous idea. This will drive the majority population of Syria, who are Sunni Muslims, into the arms of Daesh if they're not already there. Bill Shorten has made it very clear that Labor has no time for the Assad regime. And since when did Australia decide that we're going to agree to this Soviet-Iranian proposal for keeping Assad in office? So we didn't agree to it the last 2 years. And let's remember, Chris, that Assad is responsible for 200,000 people's deaths. I'm talking about civilians. I'm not talking about even the military. And Human Rights Watch estimated that in the period over the last year, 85% of those deaths are due to barrel bombs on cities that Assad is dropping from his Air Force. When Barack Obama failed to destroy those chemical factories 2 years ago, I've got a piece in The Spectator about this, the Syrian regime took it as their ability to use conventional weapons against their cities of their own population. And that's what's driving millions of people into the surrounding countries and hundreds of thousands into Europe. It's not a good idea to support that.
But Michael Danby, nobody is arguing in support of Bashar al-Assad. What people are arguing about is some sort of resolution that can eliminate Islamic State and bring some stability to the country before you deal with Bashar al-Assad. And even your own leader Bill Shorten and Deputy Leader Tanya Plibersek have not discounted some role for Bashar al-Assad in a reconstituted government.
Well, all they've said is that they want further information, but Bill has said very clearly that you can't distinguish between Assad and Daesh. I mean, it is plainly unethical to support a dictator that is driving people out of his country in the hundreds of thousands. And this will drive people into the arms of the extremist Sunni groups to support this Russian-Iranian plan. I mean, part of the reason that there is a dreadful bloodbath in that country is the majority of the people do not want an Iranian dictatorship via Assad established over their country. And the idea that Julie Bishop has of intelligence sharing with Iran, of defence cooperation and bringing Iranian consulates to Melbourne or Sydney, do we really need that here in Australia after all of the mayhem that Iran has wreaked across the world? I'd remind you that in Buenos Aires in Argentina, Iranian diplomats, including the current Iranian Defence Minister, has an indictment by Interpol against him for blowing up a community centre in Buenos Aires where 88 people were killed.
There's no doubt the Iranian government has been and continues to be linked to terrorist groups, and you are taking your campaign against Julie Bishop's and this government's dealings with Iran to a public level with a billboard on the streets of Melbourne, I noticed, saying that that we should campaign against Bishop's Iran deal. You're planning to do something similar in Sydney. But
I'm loud and proud.
Isn't the reality here, Michael Danby, that the United States foreign policy under Barack Obama is being more accommodating to Assad in Syria because it wants a pragmatic solution? And there's no way here that the Australian government can be wag the tail of the dog that is the US strategic foreign policy. That's a US foreign policy that is driving this arrangement in Syria, and that Australia, as a loyal ally to the US, can't possibly be out of step with it.
But Chris, you wouldn't be a supporter of Barack Obama's highly successful foreign policy in the rest of the world. I mean, it's very successful in in Eastern Europe, in the Ukraine, isn't it?
I couldn't agree more. Barack Obama has been weak, but we don't get to choose the American president we work with.
The Americans. If you want to ask me what other things we might do, why doesn't the Australian Army train the Kurds, arm the Kurds? These are the people who want to fight Daesh. They don't seem to get support from anyone. We could do as Tanya Plibersek said too, and appease the Turks if we're going to support the Kurds by creating a no-fly zone over northern Syria, where most of these Syrian refugees are trying to flee to. Then we wouldn't have millions of them pouring out of Syria. That would be a place where the United Nations refugee organisations could look after them.
Michael, I'm going to have to wrap it up because we are running out of time. I appreciate you. You are right. There are lots of alternatives that could be explored, but in the end, whatever we do,
we don't think that I haven't thought of them.
Yeah, but we have to do it in concert with the United States. That's the point. We're sort of locked into what the US want to do. But we'll carry on with this conversation later on, I'm sure, because sadly this issue is going to be dogging us and the rest of the world for many, many months to come. Thanks very much for joining us again, Michael.
Pleasure.
That's the Parliamentary Secretary, Shadow Parliamentary Secretary to the Opposition Leader Bill Shorten. Michael Danby joining us from Melbourne. After the break.